There's a particular kind of silence that settles into a house after your wife passes. It's not the peaceful kind. It's the kind that follows you from room to room, sits across from you at the dinner table, and watches you from the empty side of the bed. I learned to live inside that silence for 3 years before I understood that the loneliness I felt wasn't just grief. It was something I had chosen to ignore for a long time, the slow, creeping realization that my own son had stopped seeing me as a father and started seeing me as a balance sheet. I was 67 years old when I finally opened my eyes. My name is Walter, and I spent 41 years as a structural engineer. I built things meant to last: bridges, commercial buildings, the kind of infrastructure that people drive over and walk through every day without a second thought. I was good at my work, careful, methodical. I understood how things held together and what made them fail. Looking back now, I should have applied that same thinking to my own family years before everything fell apart. My son was 38. He worked in real estate. Not the kind where you help families find their first home, the kind where you move money around and call it investment. His wife, my daughter-in-law, worked alongside him. They had met in college, married young, and by the time I retired, they had built what looked from the outside like a very successful life. A large house in a good neighborhood, 2 late-model cars, vacations I only heard about through photographs posted online. I was proud of them. Or I told myself I was. The truth was that I rarely saw them. They lived 40 minutes away, which in another era would have meant Sunday dinners and dropping by unannounced. Instead, it meant carefully scheduled visits twice a year, Thanksgiving and whatever weekend in December they could spare before their holiday travel plans took them somewhere warmer. My grandchildren, a boy and a girl, were 9 and 11 the last time I really spent an afternoon with them. They called me by my first name. I'm not sure they knew any other. After my wife passed, my son came to the house once to help sort through her belongings. He was efficient about it, clinical. He identified what should be donated, what should be stored, and what, in his opinion, should simply be discarded. He didn't cry. He said he was being practical. I didn't argue. I was too tired. And somewhere underneath the exhaustion, I think I was afraid that if I pushed back, he would simply stop coming at all. That fear kept me quiet for a long time. I had savings. 40 years of careful living had left me with a retirement account, a brokerage account, and the house paid off in full. I didn't live extravagantly. I had no reason to. I cooked simple meals, maintained the garden my wife had planted, and occasionally met old colleagues for coffee. My financial advisor, a woman I had trusted for over 15 years, managed my investments conservatively. I didn't need to touch the principal. The dividends and my pension covered everything I needed. What I didn't know, what I had no reason to suspect, was that 8 months after my wife's funeral, my son had petitioned to become my legal financial guardian. I only found out because of a letter. It arrived on a Tuesday in early March, unremarkable looking, from a law firm I didn't recognize. I almost set it aside with the rest of the mail I'd been letting pile up on the kitchen counter. But something about the return address made me open it instead, a formality, I thought, probably related to my wife's estate, which had taken longer than expected to fully close. It was not related to my wife's estate. The letter was a notification that a petition had been filed in the county probate court requesting that I be placed under a voluntary financial conservatorship, with my son listed as the proposed conservator. The language was careful and legal and almost gentle in tone, which somehow made it worse. It described me as an elderly individual who might benefit from assistance managing complex financial decisions. It cited my age. It cited my recent bereavement. It cited, and this was the part that made my hands go still on the paper, 2 instances of what it called irregular financial behavior in the past year. I read that paragraph 3 times. I had no idea what irregular financial behavior they were referring to. My accounts were straightforward. I paid my bills on time. I hadn't made any unusual purchases or transfers. I lived in the same house I had lived in for 26 years and drove a 7-year-old truck that I kept in good condition because I saw no reason to replace something that still worked. I set the letter down on the kitchen table and sat with it for a long time. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something quieter and colder. It was the feeling of standing on a bridge you built yourself and noticing, for the first time, a crack running through the foundation and understanding that the crack had been there for a while, that you simply hadn't been looking. I called my financial advisor the next morning. I asked her, as casually as I could manage, whether there had been any unusual activity on my accounts recently. There was a pause on her end of the line, the kind of pause that tells you the answer is yes before a single word is spoken. She told me that approximately 6 weeks earlier, she had received a signed authorization form in my name, requesting that a significant portion of my brokerage account, just over $230,000, be transferred in increments to a third-party investment fund. The form had appeared legitimate. It had my signature. It had my account information. It had been processed without issue because there was no reason, on its face, to question it. I asked her the name of the fund. She told me. I didn't recognize it, but the address listed for the fund was in the same city where my son and daughter-in-law operated their real estate business. I thanked my financial advisor and told her I would be in touch. Then I hung up the phone and went to my desk drawer, where I kept a folder with copies of documents I had signed over the past year, medical paperwork, a car insurance renewal, a charitable donation receipt, letters to my homeowners association. I had not signed any financial authorization form, not 6 weeks ago, not ever, to that fund. The signature on the authorization I requested a copy by fax the same afternoon was mine, or rather, it was a very good approximation of mine. Someone had studied it carefully. The pen pressure was slightly different if you looked closely enough, and the way the W curved at the start of my name was just a fraction too deliberate, too controlled. I had been signing my name the same way for 60 years. I knew what it was supposed to look like by instinct, not by effort. Whoever had signed that form had put effort into it. That effort was the tell. I did not call my son. I want to explain that decision because I've had people ask me since why I didn't simply pick up the phone and confront him directly. The answer is that I spent 41 years in engineering, and in engineering, you do not act on a hypothesis. You gather data, you test, you confirm before you make changes. Confronting someone who has forged your signature before you understand the full scope of what they've done is like reporting a crack in a bridge before you've determined whether it goes all the way through. You may cause a collapse you could have prevented with more patience. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I contacted an attorney, not someone my son knew, not anyone from my old professional network. I found a woman through a referral from my doctor, an estate and elder law attorney with a reputation for being meticulous. I drove to her office on a Thursday afternoon and put the letter from the probate court and the faxed copy of the forged authorization on her desk. She looked at both documents for a long time without speaking. Then she looked at me and said, "How long has this been going on?" That question opened something up that I hadn't been ready for. Because the honest answer was that I didn't know. And not knowing, realizing that my own financial life had been accessed, manipulated, and redirected without my knowledge for an unknown amount of time, that was the moment the cold feeling I'd been carrying since Tuesday finally became something sharper. My attorney contacted my financial institution and placed an immediate hold on any further transfers. She also filed a response to the probate court petition, noting that I was fully competent, fully engaged, and had no knowledge of or consent for the conservatorship filing. We requested the documentation supporting the petition's claims about my irregular financial behavior. What came back was illuminating. The 2 instances of so-called irregular behavior cited in the petition were both transactions I had not made. One was a withdrawal from my savings account. One was a purchase through my brokerage. Both had been processed using what appeared to be my credentials. Both had occurred within the past year. And both, when I traced them as carefully as I could through the paper trail, my attorney helped me follow, pointed back to activity that had originated not from my home computer or my phone, but from a device registered to an address in my son's neighborhood. My daughter-in-law worked from home. I'm going to pause here, because I think it's important to say what this felt like. My son was my child. Whatever distance had grown between us, whatever coldness had replaced the warmth I remembered from when he was younger, I had never not once allowed myself to believe he was capable of this. When I started to understand the shape of what had happened, my first instinct was to find an alternative explanation. A mistake, a misunderstanding, someone else, not him. But the evidence didn't leave much room for alternative explanations. The forged authorization, the conservatorship petition filed without my knowledge, the shell fund at the same address as their business, the transactions originating from their neighborhood. These were not coincidences. These were steps in a plan. The plan, as my attorney and I eventually pieced it together, appeared to work like this. My daughter-in-law, who handled the administrative side of their real estate operation, had obtained enough of my personal and financial information, account numbers, signature samples, possibly even my online banking credentials, to begin quietly siphoning money from my accounts into their fund. The conservatorship petition was, in all likelihood, meant to be the final step. Once they had legal control of my finances through the guardianship process, anything remaining in my accounts would have been far easier to access and far harder for me to question or retrieve. She had been counting on me not paying attention. She had been right for a while. My attorney advised me to continue as normally as possible while we built our case. This was the hardest part. I had Sunday dinner with my son and his wife 3 weeks after I found the letter, a previously scheduled visit that I kept, precisely because canceling it would have raised suspicion. I sat at their dining room table and ate the meal my daughter-in-law had prepared and answered questions about my health and my garden and whether I'd thought more about selling the house. She asked that last question with the particular kind of casual ease that I now understood was practiced. She had been planting that idea for months. The house was the next logical target once the accounts had been consolidated under their control. I told her I was attached to the house, that I wasn't ready to make any decisions, that I appreciated her concern. She smiled and refilled my glass of water. I drove home that night with my hands steady on the steering wheel and a clarity of purpose I hadn't felt in years. There is something almost useful about betrayal when you finally name it for what it is. It removes all the ambiguity. You stop making excuses. You stop finding reasons to look the other way. You simply see things as they are, and you decide what to do about them. Here is what we did. First, we filed a formal complaint with the State Financial Regulatory Authority, documenting the forged authorization and the fraudulent transfers. My attorney also filed a separate civil complaint for financial elder abuse, a specific statute in our state that carries significant penalties and, importantly, allows for the recovery of attorneys' fees. Second, we filed a counter motion in the probate court that not only opposed the conservatorship petition, but requested a full investigation into how the petition had been filed and what documentation had been submitted in support of it. Third, and this is the part I had spent the most time thinking through, we contacted the investment fund itself. Because here is what my daughter-in-law had not considered carefully enough. The fund was a limited liability company registered in their state. My son was listed as a manager. My daughter-in-law was listed as the registered agent. The money they had transferred into it was still there, most of it, anyway, because they hadn't had time to move it further before the hold went into place. And because the transfers had been made fraudulently, using a forged signature, the legal standing of those funds was not what they believed it to be. Those were my funds. They had never stopped being my funds. The forged authorization had no legal validity. My attorney filed for a civil asset freeze, and it was granted. $219,000. The amount that remained after whatever fees and expenses had already been drawn out was frozen, pending resolution of the fraud complaint. My son called me on a Wednesday evening. His voice was different from the last time we'd spoken at dinner, tighter, with something underneath it that I recognized as the sound of someone who has just realized that the plan did not go as expected. He said he had heard from his attorney that there appeared to be some kind of misunderstanding regarding some financial documents. He said he wanted to talk. He said he was sure we could work this out as a family. I told him I agreed that we should talk. I suggested we meet in person. He came to my house the following Saturday, alone. My daughter-in-law did not come. I had expected that. I had a pot of coffee ready and I poured him a cup, and I sat across from him at the same kitchen table where I had opened that letter 6 weeks earlier, and I let him talk. He talked for a while. He used words like misunderstanding and miscommunication, and he said that his wife had perhaps acted impulsively without thinking through all the implications. He said he had not known the full extent of what she had done. He said he was sorry. He said it more than once, in different configurations, as though repetition would change the weight of it. I listened to all of it. I didn't interrupt. When he finished, I told him what I knew. Not as an accusation. I'd had enough experience watching accusation curdle conversations into defensiveness, but simply as a series of facts. The forged signature, the transfers, the conservatorship petition, the fund, the asset freeze, the complaints that had been filed with the regulatory authority and the court. I laid it out the same way I used to present structural assessments to clients, clearly, in order, without editorializing. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then he said, "Dad, I want to make this right." I told him that making it right was no longer something that happened in my kitchen over coffee. It was something that was going to happen through the legal process, and that he would have an opportunity to cooperate with that process, which would reflect well on him, or not to cooperate, which would reflect poorly. I told him that his attorney had already been in contact with my attorney, and that any further conversations about the substance of the matter should go through them. He looked at me the way my son had not looked at me in many years, not like I was furniture, not like I was a problem to be managed, like I was someone he didn't entirely recognize. I told him I loved him. I meant it. And then I asked him to leave. I want to tell you what happened next, because I think the ending matters. The civil case settled before it went to trial. The full amount frozen in the fund was returned to my accounts, along with a penalty amount that covered my attorney's fees and a portion of additional damages under the Elder Financial Abuse Statute. My daughter-in-law entered into an agreement with the regulatory authority that included a significant fine and a prohibition on managing other people's finances in a professional capacity for 7 years. The conservatorship petition was dismissed. My son was not charged criminally. The investigators determined that while he had been aware of some of what his wife was doing, the evidence supporting his direct participation was not sufficient to meet the bar for criminal charges. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I've turned it over many times. What I've come to is this: my grief about who my son became is separate from my responsibility to protect what I worked for. Both things can be true at once. I changed my financial accounts. New institutions, new advisors, new safeguards. I set up a financial power of attorney with my attorney herself named as a fiduciary, with explicit instructions and oversight mechanisms built in. I updated my estate documents. I installed two-factor authentication on everything that could have it. I'm not naive enough to think that paperwork solves everything, but I'm an engineer. I believe in systems. I believe that good systems make failure harder. My grandchildren sent me a card in December, a Christmas card, handmade, with drawings on the inside. My granddaughter wrote that she missed me. My grandson wrote that he hoped I was doing okay. I put the card on the mantel above the fireplace where my wife used to put the ones that mattered most, and I looked at it for a long time. I'm not invisible to everyone. I had forgotten that for a while. These days I wake up early and make coffee and sit at the kitchen table with the window cracked open, even in cold weather, Because I like the sound of the neighborhood in the morning. I've started consulting again part-time. Nothing that demands too much because I find that I still like solving structural problems. I like the clarity of them. Either something holds or it doesn't. Either the math is right or it isn't. People ask me sometimes if I regret waiting as long as I did to see what was happening. I've thought about that question honestly. The regret I feel isn't for the waiting. It's for the years I spent making myself smaller, quieter, less present, easier to ignore because I was afraid that asking for more would cost me the little I still had. That kind of shrinking doesn't protect you. It just makes you easier to take from. I'm 67 years old. I built bridges for 41 years. I know what it means for something to hold. I intend to hold.